Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last lesson in Algebra 2, and this is lesson 31A. Okay, we're going to talk about vectors. So we add and subtract vectors just like we add and subtract normal numbers, just like we have been doing all along since pre-algebra. So we have positive 5 minus 8. That's going to equal negative 3. Okay, same thing with this one. We can add multiple vectors, not just two. We have negative 6 plus 3. That is negative 3. Negative 3 minus 4 is negative 7. So our answer is negative 7 there. So pretty simple. We're just adding vectors just like we do numbers. Okay, the two components of any vector is direction and magnitude. That's just a definition that you need to memorize. And it does show up in the quote of Despicable Me, the first one, when they're talking with the supervillain Victor. So he says vectors are direction and magnitude. Okay, and this figure is helping us understand what's going on in this problem. So let's go ahead and read it together. Tom traveled 6 miles east and 8 miles north. So he started from the center. He traveled 6 miles east and then he went 8 miles north. Okay, pretty simple. Use the Pythagorean theorem to find the distance from his starting point to his ending point. Your answer is the magnitude of the resultant vector. So you can think of magnitude as measurement. It's not really quite the same thing, but you can think of it as the same thing. But when we talk about vectors, we're talking about magnitude. So we are just going to use the Pythagorean theorem to basically find the magnitude or the measurement of this vector. Okay, so Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where c squared is always going to be the hypotenuse of the triangle. So super easy, right? We have 6 squared is 36 plus 8 squared is 64 equals c squared. So 36 plus 64, 6 plus 4 is 10, 3 plus 6 is 9, plus 1 is 100. So 100 equals c squared, and we take the square root of both sides. So I get plus minus 10 equals c. But since we're talking about a measurement or a magnitude, we're only going to take the positive. We just throw out the negative 10 because it can't be that. Because algebraically, it can be negative. In the real world, in our word problem, it can't be negative because it's a magnitude for more of a measurement. So C equals 10. Okay. And you could have called it H for hypotenuse. You could have called it whatever you want, but we mean the magnitude of this vector is 10. Okay, great. Okay, we're going to learn about some trigonometric functions, and I like to use the mnemonic SOHCAHTOA. So this is just a memory trick to help us remember these trig functions. Remember, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a memory trick. So, ka, toa. And you would memorize how this is spelled. SOHCAHTOA. And it stands for sine of theta equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. So we're going to write opposite over the hypotenuse. This cosine of theta equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So adjacent over hypotenuse. I spelled that right? Okay. The tangent of theta equals the opposite over adjacent. So the opposite over adjacent. Okay. So now let's go ahead and put this into numbers. Okay. And we are going to need a calculator for this stuff. And the reason is because in the olden days, before they had calculators, they would use tables and they would look up the values on the tables. But instead of using tables, we use calculators nowadays. So these types of problems are on the ACT, SAT tests. So I do recommend that you get a good calculator that the ACT and SAT allow on their exams to practice with, and that you really practice with these things. So we're going to use our calculator, and you just need to make sure that your calculator has sine, cosine, and tangent. Okay? Sine, cosine, tangent. Okay. So the opposite over hypotenuse. So I look at theta for the relationship, and that's going to tell me what is the adjacent and what is the opposite. So you pretty much know what opposite means, right? It's mirroring or opposite theta. And the length that's adjacent, adjacent means next to. Hand me that folder. It's adjacent to your desk. It's next to your desk. So remember, adjacent means next to, and opposite means across. Okay, so the opposite of theta is 5. And the hypotenuse is this one, right? The hypotenuse is always opposite the 90-degree angle and is usually the biggest one. So 13. So we're just going to plug into our calculator, and it's going to be a decimal. Okay. We're just plugging in 5 divided by 13. And it's a very specific reason why I'm not doing long division here. I want it put into my calculator because the next problem, we're going to do the next step. I love Matthew C because it really does take you through all these baby steps to get to where we need to be. So when you do these SOHCAHTOA problems, this is a memory trick for some trigonometric functions that you need on the ACT, SAT exam. If you're college bound, that matters to you. And we're plugging these values into the calculator on purpose, okay? So 0.38 and as a rule of thumb, when we're doing stuff scientifically and doing a lot of decimals, 4 decimals are pretty standard of what we round to. So I'm going to round to the 4th decimal. That means its neighbor is 1, so it stays the same. So 3846 is what I'm going to write down. Okay, great. Let's do the next one. The cosine of theta is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and my memory trick is ka. Again, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a memory trick. Okay, so adjacent is 12, and my hypotenuse is 13. So again, I'm not going to do long division here. I'm going to plug it into my calculator because that will become important later. 12 divided by 13. Okay, and I'm going to round out to 4 digits. My 5th digit is 7, so that means my 4th digit needs to go up 1. So I'm rounding to 0.9231. Okay, tangent is the opposite over adjacent. So the tangent of theta equals the opposite, which is 5, divided by the adjacent. The memory trick is TOA, SOHCAHTOA. Okay? I'm going to plug it into my calculator. Oh, I'll clear first, just in case. 5 divided by 12. And I'm going to round to 4 digits. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Look at my next digit. Yes, it is bigger than 5. My 5th digit is bigger than 5. So I need to round my 4th digit up 1. So I'm going to write down 0.4167. Okay, so that looks really good. Okay, now we're actually going to solve for theta. So we're going to go the extra step in solving for theta. Using the inverse of the sine function, find the measure of angle theta in the triangle shown in number 5. So in this one, using the sine function, we're actually going to solve for theta. And I do want to show you the algebra of how we write this. Okay, so when I'm solving for theta, and we're doing the sine function, so we say the inverse sine of theta, and that is written as sine to the superscript -1. It's kind of like an exponent, but it's a superscript, okay, of theta equals, so the inverse sine of this number, 0.3846 equals theta. So that's how we write it algebraically. And we're going to say theta equals, so you write theta is a Greek letter, and it's mostly used for angles. So you write it by drawing a circle and putting a line through it. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and type in 513 because I want to be as exact as I can to get the measurement as close as possible. So 513. And then I'm going to take the inverse sine of theta. So on my calculator, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but I have to click Shift and then the sign. And I'm just going to go ahead and round 22.6 degrees. So 22.6, and then the degree is that little circle in the superscript, equals theta. So even though number 6, so I'm just going to write that, theta equals 22.6 degrees. And that's just going to show my homeschool teacher that I did do that, even though my work is up here. So I actually want to do these for all of them, just so that you get a little bit extra practice, even though the Math You See lesson doesn't ask you to. So we say the cosine, the inverse cosine of 12/13 equals theta. So what is theta equal to? So I'm going to put in my calculator. Let's see if you can see this very well. 12 divided by 13, and then the inverse cosine, and I get 22.6. So 22.6 degrees. Okay, let's try the tangent. The inverse tangent of 5/12 equals theta. So we do 5 divided by 12 equals, and then we do shift tangent, and that's 22.6. So theta equals 22.6 degrees. So this just tells us that sometimes when we're solving these problems, we'll have two values and not the other. So we have to remember which trigonometric function that we can use. Okay, but that gives you some practice. Okay, so now we're going to do some a word problem kind of on her own. Cindy left her home and drove 5 miles due east and then 10 miles due north. Let's go ahead and graph that. So never eat shredded wheat is another memory trick that we can use. So she left her home, drove 5 miles due east. So 5 miles, so that's 5, and then 10 miles due north. So then she drove 10 north. Not to scale here. Just saying. And then theta is right there because our 90-degree angle is right there. Okay, perfect. What is her distance and direction from her starting point? Oh, distance and direction. That sounds like a lot like magnitude and direction. Yeah. It sounds like a lot like magnitude and direction, right? Distance, magnitude, measurement, right? That's what you're going to think of. Okay, perfect. So round distances in this lesson to the nearest hundredth and degrees to the nearest tenth. Okay, great. It tells us where to round because we're definitely going to get a decimal. We definitely need our calculator for this one too. Okay, so we want magnitude first. We want to find the measurement of the hypotenuse. So we just do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So 25 plus 100 equals c squared. 125 equals c squared. Take the square root of both sides. I get plus minus. I feel like I should know this, but for some reason my brain's not working so well. So where's square root right there? Oh, it's certainly in a small place. That just sounded so familiar, but it's definitely 125 is definitely not a square. So we're gonna round to the nearest hundredth, so 10th, hundredth. Okay, and then that third decimal place is a 0, so I just keep it as it is. So I'm gonna write down 11.18. And I'm not gonna clear it. I need that part. So 11.18 equals C. And I'm just going to take the positive one because I'm talking about the real world scenario, so it's not going to be negative. It's a distance. Distances are not negative unless we're talking about moving backwards, which we're not in this case. So 11.8 equals C, and I'm going to go ahead and circle that. Okay, and then degrees to the nearest tenth. Okay, so we now need to use one of these trigonometric functions to figure out theta. And I'm actually going to use tangent. Okay, so I have the inverse tangent of, and I need to do opposite over adjacent. TOA, opposite over adjacent. So I'm going to do the opposite divided by the adjacent equals theta. So theta equals, okay, and I'm just going to do 10 over 5. So clear. 10 divided by 5. Oh, that's 2. Super easy, right? And then we're going to do the inverse tangent. And I get 63.4 because we need to round to the nearest tenth. 63.4 degrees. Okay, so our distance is in miles, so make sure you squeeze in miles right there. So and then she went 63.4 degrees. Okay, great. Pretty easy there. Okay, same thing. We're gonna make our weather, our distance, direction grid here. A boat sails 100 miles east. Okay, 100. And then 40 miles north. 40. And theta is right there. My 90-degree angle is right there. Perfect. Give the distance and direction of the boat from its starting point. Okay, so we need distance and direction. Sounds a lot like magnitude and direction, doesn't it? So we need that a squared plus b squared equals c squared thing again. So 100 squared, that's 100 times 100. That's 4 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that gives me 10,000. 10,000 plus 40 times 40. 4 times 4 is 16. And then that gives me 2 zeros. So that's 1,600 equals c squared. So I have 11,600 equals c squared. Take the square root. And let's go ahead and take the square root of this number. 11,600 square rooted. And that gives me 107 point, let's go ahead and go 2 decimal places. 107.70. And we are in miles, so let's go ahead and squeeze miles into our answer right there. Okay, and now we need the direction. So we can do tangent again, or we can do sine. So I like to write Soka Toa up here because I don't want to give my brain too much work. I might make a mistake. So let's go ahead and use sine. So the inverse sine of opposite, so the opposite is 40 over the hypotenuse, which is this 107.7 equals theta. So theta equals, okay. So you used to be able to store this, but 107.70 is the square root of 11,600. So that's what I'm going to type into my calculator. So let me show you what I'm going to type in because I want to be as exact as possible. If you keep rounding on every step of math problems, you might have done every step right, but then end up with a round number. I mean, a wrong number because you rounded somewhere incorrectly. So I just want to be as exact as I can. So I want to do 40 divided by the square root. Oh, that's going to give me, yeah. Let's see, 40 divided by, I think I have to input the number, and then I need to square root that part, and then equals, and it's going to give me the right answer. And then I need to take the sign of this number. So then I go shift sign, and then that gives me the theta. Okay, so that gives me 21.8 degrees. And I'm just going to go ahead and circle that. And so we went 107.7 miles and 21.8 degrees. All right, so that is it. Again, it's pretty impossible to do any of these trigonometric functions without either tables or a calculator. So I highly recommend a calculator. And that is all for today. So great job finishing all the lessons with Algebra 2. And I hopefully will see you in maybe another course, or I hope you had a great time learning Algebra 2, and I will see you later. Bye.